Hello.
This is
This is a becoming critter. I was so pissed when it was becoming creature was too short, or rather too long for Twitter. I was like,
Oh, the handle?
what's slang for creature?
Right. I was trying to get Michael Kersey as my handle on Twitch, and I couldn't get it. Some guy out there has it, and it's not me. And
And
I
it's a
was,
made-up name. That's incredible.
yeah, it's totally made up. It's just a fake name. Like,
Yeah,
you know.
obviously.
So, yeah, we could talk about what I've been mulling over lately. You know, I run the talk show, Philosophers on Twitch, playing Flight Simulator, which, by the way, I could use a better soundbite
Name?
for that.
Oh, okay.
No, the name's amazing. Fuck you, dude. No, the name's great. The name is okay. I like the name. The thing about it is that yes, it's long as fuck.
Just take out the in on Twitch. Like, it's on Twitch. You
Right.
don't have to say it.
But Philosophers playing Flight Simulator.
Yeah, you got the Philosophers playing Flight Simulator, hosted by Michael Kersey.
Hosted by Michael. Right. You can add
I don't know,
the post name.
but you want it so that the acronym
Right.
is like
POFs.
POFs, POFs. I don't know, but it's like philandering, fuming philosophers on Twitch playing Flight Simulator, finding out, fucking up. I don't know.
Right.
Just
Are you?
fucking roll with it?
Have you tried to rap before?
Never.
Never.
Well,
You've tried.
not out loud. Not out loud. Not out loud. There was actually one time when a friend asked me to, and I like tried, and it was like one line, and then I was like, "Yeah, I can do
Oh, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with that.
It's like it's up here."
I remember. So my experience of this is I was at camp. So let me tell you about my process.
Sure.
That this will make sense. So I started tweeting a year and a bit ago, and I also started trying to write then, and trying to make videos then, and trying to record stuff then. And I would record like long rambles on my phone, and I have them like in my phone, like 87 fucking recordings or whatever it is, and
Videos.
mostly audio stuff.
Okay.
And basically, I have the belief that there's some kind of like. So here's the weird thing: people have knowledge that they don't know how to explain.
Sure.
Right. The classic example of this is Virgin asks Chad, how do you get girls to like you? And Chad says, just be yourself, bro. Right. And you're right. It's just be yourself, bro. And it's funny because, first of all, it's true. First of all, it just is true. That's what you should do, I think. Speaking as, right. Right. Be yourself. There's something true in it, right? But no one can implement that instruction. It's like the most useless fucking instruction you've ever heard. You're like, okay, like, should I?
Well, I'll give you my advice. I would say what I do is be myself. For you, I'd recommend something different.
Right. Right. Just be a little.
But yeah, I get what you're saying. You're
be
saying
yourself, but not weird or whatever.
That's just too like abstract. Like what does that even mean? But what they're really trying to say is like be comfortable being yourself, and that confidence will be attractive. But that's kind of difficult to teach in 20 words.
Exactly. Yeah. So also in other domains it works like this. So imagine like I became interested in this in part because I know Sama Buria, who big Twitter dude these days.
Now I know how to pronounce that.
Yeah, that's how you pronounce that. So he has this whole thing about succession as a difficult, like a institutionally difficult thing to pull off. So you've got like Steve Jobs, right? Steve Jobs is doing magnificent things at Apple. Steve Jobs dies, and then Apple kind of becomes a lot more boring. What happened there, right?
Sure.
Where's the Steve Jobs apprentice? Part of the issue in my book is that thing with the like just be yourself, bro. So where you ask Steve Jobs, if you ask him like how do you make great products, right? he could, who knows how much he could explain, but I bet it
Right.
comes out a lot more confusing, at least to the listener. Like, you don't necessarily know what he
Right.
means. um and so, like, what we end up with is we end up with these like little clips and little bits of knowledge. Henry Ford, if they had asked me, what if I had asked them what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. Okay, there's a little bit of knowledge because you're like, cool, there's a parable, there's an idea there, there's something I can apply. But do we have like the Henry Ford genius? Like, we don't really have it. I think, unless he passed it down somehow. So this succession thing is part of what got me interested in this. So back on the topic of me recording a bunch of shit, I have the belief that people have, like, pretty much everybody. I don't know if it, like, I want to say pretty much everybody has some fountain of knowledge on some topic. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't feel like they know much, right? But if you get them talking
Right.
about the right thing, they will just
Yeah.
go forever. They will be making distinctions that other people can't make. They will talk about the, physical and spiritual side of whatever this task is, right?
Right.
So, like, pouring tea, right? The person will be like, "No, I don't know much about anything." But you're like, but maybe they really like tea. You actually get them talking about it, they'll be like, "Well, no, there's a million different types, and you got
And
to
a
be
lot of people
careful
don't even know like what that is for
for
them.
themselves."
Yeah, because like I do a pre-interview for my show to make sure that I'm not having like, half an hour of nonsense.
Right.
And on that talk, I often ask people, what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What are you knowledgeable about? And a lot of the time, people are like,
I don't know.
well, this is what I do,
Right.
and then I have to dig. And
Right.
so that's why I do that because
Exactly.
like I'll go through their Twitter and they may have said all this stuff that was liked by other people, but they're actually not very aware, and this happens a lot. They're not very aware of what they want to talk about.
Right.
And it's actually not that hard to explore. All you have to do is say, what do I think a lot about? What are people interested in when they speak to me? And what problems am I good at solving? And like when I'm interacting with people, what do I want to talk about when I'm interacting with people?
Right.
What am I looking for?
Yeah.
And if you actually ask yourself those questions, you're going to find answers about yourself. And this is a little bit of what we're talking about with what you want to do. I feel like we're all just like completely invisibly blind to who we are, because we see this in relationships all the time, where it's like we know, the knowledge is in our bodies of what we want and
Hmm.
who we should, what kind of person we should be with and everything. And um it's just like not on the surface of our minds,
It's
it's
like
not on the tip of our
pre-verbal, pretty
tongue.
much.
Exactly. A lot of the meaning question comes down to that self-knowledge of like, what am I, like, what do I even fucking like, what do I like, I don't,
And so,
it's worth exploring.
and one of the prompts that yeah, I agree with all that. And one of the prompts that I use for myself, and it works to some degree with other people, is what gets me like in the zone. And
Yeah.
compared to most people, I think I'm comfortable saying I'm pretty extroverted. It's
Sure.
popular for extroverts to say no, I'm actually introverted, but I think there are some real extroverts, in some way. And part of what that means is that sometimes I just feel like I get in a fucking zone and I can just talk about something and, like,
Right.
pretty much never shut up. And also, even better, when the stuff coming out is good. And that's if you can nail that, where it's just like the stuff's going right. And a little bit, like, I've worked on there is this skill of like bullshitting, right?
Yeah.
Which I believe that you have some of this skill, which is just getting the stuff to come out, right? But then
Mhm.
when you can do that in an area where you in fact have knowledge, that's magical. And so I try to tap into that in order to understand myself, in order to know what I should do with my life, right? And so in my case, the talk show came out of some instincts I have about bringing community together, some instincts I have about finding a place where I can, kind of hold court and, like, bring people in and get people exchanging value, but it's all pretty implicit. And so I try to follow the good instincts wherever possible. And
Mhm.
sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's just there's sort of just this process of, like, returning to the source and trying to speak from it. And that's a skill people can develop.
returning to the source, what I'm thinking about with we're talking about bullshitting and like knowing yourself, and and if you can do that in an area in which you're knowledgeable. And my interpretation of this is essentially the ability to improvise well, right? Because if you're trying to bullshit in an area you don't know enough about, right, then you're not going to sell it. But bullshitting in an area that you do know about is actually exploration. Like you can discover something true in that process. It's only called bullshitting because you're not coming from a place that's inherently true. You're not saying, like, you're not Walt Whitman spitting truth,
Right.
but in order to arrive there, you need to improvise and iterate and work through it. And that's kind of a bullshitting process. Like you need to go through, like Tinder swiping, lie. Oh, that resonates.
Right.
And then you write that down and then you work on that.
I mean, like it's interesting too. It's like when people like have a drink together, they'll suddenly find that they're having a good conversation. They're like, "This is an amazing conversation," and
Right.
it's the disinhibition that does it. But you can be disinhibited in real life, but that's another step, right? You gotta either be kind of dispositionally set up to do it, or more likely work on it. You know, say
It's
the stuff.
weird. Yeah, it's weird about alcohol because alcohol will kind of um, collapse one's experience down to where like it's got really toppy kurtosis so that you're focused really within the last minute or so. And that is kind of like forced meditation.
Hmm.
Oh, it's not exactly the same. It's not one to one, but it's very similar.
Hmm.
And um, thinking about how those two things are, I feel like that's a huge component of the euphoria that people get is just the fact that they're not worried
Mm-hmm.
about what they said to their boss the other day. And if they are worried about that, they can talk about it and they love getting it off their chest. Um, and of course, this isn't universal to the whole inebriation situation, but I feel like, becoming in the moment is just like naturally really enjoyable. And that's why a lot of people like drinking. Um, and I know Gladwell is not exactly the most respected scientific figure, but in his book, Talking with Strangers, he discusses how what's really happening when people are drunk is not actually a reduction in inhibition or judgment, but
Mm.
actually it's they have a harder time accessing their memory,
Mm.
and of course accessing and forming new memories, and so that their experience is really short, so that like they're not really thinking about consequences, but
It's
it's
like
not
a
because they're
cheat code for being present. Is the idea.
right. But they're essentially just going like moment to moment to moment to moment,
Right.
and there's just no concern for future me or thinking about past me. I'm just like
Yeah.
always responding. It's super situational, and
It's like a false enlightenment. I mean, is how I put it.
sorta,
I mean,
sorta.
the reason I put it like that is because I mean it's interesting, right? It's like sometimes people operate at a higher level when they make themselves operate at a lower level, right? That's what the substance does. It kind of kneecaps you on some of your abilities, like your ability to stress, right, or your ability to like worry in a particular way. Some cycle, right, can get interrupted, and that's often when people get benefits from it. But at the same time,
Mm,
the bad more like psychological effects of alcohol, bad when people experience them, like I don't know, like they get depressed or they get angry really easily or
yeah.
whatever, is because a lot of the way I tend to think about substances, my kind of theory is simple theory is that they interrupt some functions, some mental functions, and enhance others. That's a like it's not a tautology, but it's a sort of very simple lens, right? And you know,
Mhm.
um, I mean,
Well,
not the
let's apply that. Let's apply that to both enlightenment and let's apply that to tripping, right?
okay,
So, if someone, I had a friend that she lost her father and then she did acid like a week later,
that's a
and
terrible idea.
she had a terrible trip
That's the worst thing, or that's
where
God, people are dumb.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry to your friend. That's terrible. Yeah.
So she was exploring all these emotions, and she was like estranged from her father, and then he passed away, and then she tripped like a week after, and it was a bad trip. Yeah.
I mean, life is a bad trip in those situations, right?
But she was working through all of that stuff, and it helped her in the end. But the experience was very painful. But I think this is kind of what is going on. Like we have the fire Buddha, right? Like a lot of people, when they're angry, when they're drunk, and when they're doing these bad things when they're drunk, I'm not saying they're enlightened. I'm really not. But what they're doing is they're working through something. They're expressing something that's real inside of them. I don't think alcohol makes people angry drunks. I think that people have something inside of them that they haven't expressed or they haven't worked through, and that thing that's been holding it down is let free. So unfortunately, if they could do all of that stuff, that angry drunk stuff, and remember it afterwards, then they might actually work through it. But the fact is that if they're getting so drunk that this is coming out and then they're not recording the memory, then when they go to sleep, their mind isn't using the neurotransmitters and the hormones in order to allow you to safely work through those memories, and so you're not getting the emotional healing that you would have gotten if you had been meditating and being sincere.
Yeah, let me complain about substances for a minute because we're talking about it. My complaint about substances and your story about your friend is just a perfect whatever. I'm not judging. I don't know your friend, but
this was like a decade ago.
Yeah. People don't know how to use their minds, and so the only thing they know how to do is like the way I feel is like I'm over here, trying to like crack an egg. And they're like, oh, well, what tool do you like using to crack an egg? And I kind of tap it on the counter. And they're like, what do you think of like using a hammer? I'm like, that's a little intense. And they're like, oh yeah, no, they've got like their baseball mitt and shit. And they've got like their fucking, they got their fucking like crazy contraption or whatever. That's how I feel when people talk about using substances, because they're like, what about LSD, right? Now, I'm not against. I don't have no moral issue with it. I think probably things can be done safely.
See, you're dealing with an egg. I'm dealing with a watermelon.
Right. Well, this is people's experience, and so I've done a lot of introspective stuff, and over time, I have gained the ability to go with a lighter and lighter touch. Right. I'll give another example about this. So,
be more specific.
All right, let's do it. Let's go. Let me give an example. So, I wrote a piece, which I guess I can link in the thing, about
the show notes.
Show notes about becoming interested in history. And the thing I wrote about is that the thing I did to kind of wake up my interest in history is I listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast on World War I, and I would lay on a yoga mat and I would just listen to the podcast, and whenever it brought up a feeling in me, like, holy shit, that's the worst thing I've ever heard, people are dying in the muck, you kind of, you have some reaction, right? I would sit with the reaction, and I would pause the thing and go with that. I would use that as a stepping off point for exploring how I feel, exploring my reaction. And then sometimes when I would not have a reaction to something that I thought I should have a reaction to, and the example is like, what is it, Battle of the Marne or Battle of Verdun or whichever battle it is, where there's 100,000 people dying per month, right? And you hear the statistic and you're like, yeah, cool, sounds good. But like, it doesn't click. It doesn't get in your head because
Stalingrad, right?
Right. And so during those times, I would pause and just ask myself, like, why don't I care? What is it even? Usually it wouldn't be that I knew what it meant on an emotional, physiological level. It would more often be that I didn't know what it meant on that level.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And there's a way to find out what you really, it's like people are good at, and this goes back to the thing we were talking about earlier. We're very good at verbal processing. And you are trained in school to use your verbal center. So they say 100,000 people die per month. You can remember the phrase. You can remember the number a lot of the time. But, I mean, but you don't know how to relate to it, right? That's a skill that we're lacking, is how to relate to that. Why are
I'm
you?
getting butt in here, but on your show,
Yes.
you were talking to Eigen, and you're like, so imagine a 10,000 sided figure. And he's like, wait, got it. And I was like, what?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was like 1.5 seconds.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that's a three-dimensional object? What is what,
Right,
10,000 sides?
right. There's a
I was
low
like,
rendering time. He's got
yeah. I
really
was like, I
good.
mean, I can see like you imagining 10 sides and then adding the like fidelity,
Hmm.
like the resolution, and being like 10 to squared and then doing it again and then like I can imagine that, but being like, wait, got it. I was like,
I just want to be clear. I cannot imagine a 10,000 sided figure. I can't do that. There's no way I can
you're
do
just
it. I can.
requesting things that you can't even do.
I can. I can imagine a six
Do a
sided
handstand.
figure. I can imagine a
Sure.
cube. That's not too bad. Seven. I don't know what that looks like, but I can like add a face to the cube or something.
Sure. Yeah.
I can do that. Yeah. Um, Especially if it has to be a regular figure, then I'm in trouble. But it tops out. But let me
Some
just come
people have
back to the
different visual. Some people have different visual minds. So, like my sister, for instance,
right.
she has. I have a sister.
Yeah.
My sister, for instance, she has a visual memory of the calendar
Uh huh.
with colors
Right.
and it's like a shape. And
Yeah.
she can remember your birthday because she just brings up her shape in her mind
Right.
and like the dot there with your face, and she will never forget your mind. So some people have this super high resolution um like mental landscape where me like I can like that hexagon or whatever, I can look at a part of it,
Mm.
but I can't like see like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like I can move my vision around it in my
Right.
mind,
Right.
but I can't see something really really specific. So even like an apple, we talk about the resolution of an apple.
Right.
I can see a high resolution apple in my mind, but I can't like see the whole thing.
Yeah. I
I
can
can see
see a
like a
part.
quarter of it at a time, and I
Yeah.
can move my eyes around and see it.
Right.
But I don't know. That's just how my brain works.
Right. Um, just to wrap the point I was trying to make about the history thing. Long
Yes.
story short, I became interested in history, and I had to train up by starting with something really extreme. World War I fucking sucked. Okay, like there and like
No.
I'm saying it like it's like a stupid thing because you're supposed to be like, oh yeah, we all know that, but I don't think people know that. Like, and you watch a
Yeah.
movie. I mean, World War I, it's better than many things because many of us have like relatives, and
Right.
it's kind of still real,
Yeah.
kind of, but like it's been 100 years, right? And on the scheme of things, that's not that long.
Yeah.
Forget me talking about like the Yellow Turban Rebellion or whatever,
Mhm.
right? There's nothing. And so movies and stuff like that can help, but even then I think people
Sure.
kind of put the movie in like a secret movie area in their mind. But long story short, I have become able to be sensitized more, this is not a complete process by any stretch of the imagination, to historical facts because I've trained it up at that, right? I've specifically put points into knowing how to feel, right, about the things.
Right.
And so on the psychedelics, etc., it's in general, I sometimes get like, holy shit, when I realize what people are doing to themselves, because in my worldview, it's very intense, it's very hardcore, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying to open the egg with the sledgehammer. So no judgment, whatever. You got to learn the skills, but there's sometimes you need a lighter touch. So
I would say I want to touch on that analogy, but I was just curious because you're talking about like World War One.
yes,
Have you read any Solzhenitsyn?
I have not. That book was in my. You got it on the shelf. That
I
book
got
was in my bathroom growing up for like years
the
because I
Gulag
think.
Archipelago,
Yeah,
or
because my dad was reading it.
uh-huh.
Yeah, but I've never read it myself.
He was reading it your whole entire life.
Well, yeah, or I guess maybe my dad wasn't reading it, so that's why it was in the bathroom.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, you just
Yeah,
nonstop reading the Gulag Arc. That's pretty interesting.
yeah,
But I bring it up because like I didn't know how bad the gulags were. Like I didn't. And I read that book and I was like, holy cow,
yeah.
really bad.
Really fucking
They
bad.
were, yeah, working people like just regular citizens to death and then just taking their bones and mixing it in with concrete and stuff. It's
Yeah.
just like thousands of people in the cold with insufficient clothing.
Does that make the
because
concrete work better? Not.
not better, it was just like to add material.
Oh,
Just insane.
just to add substance.
Um Yeah, it was.
Ugh.
It's like, I mean, that's not even the worst of it, but it was just like if someone you
Yeah.
knew someone that fled the country,
Right.
then you're all screwed. It was done.
Yeah.
It was like you were gonna get tortured until you confessed,
Right.
and then you were gonna be starved to death in these camps and worked to death, and that was like the norm, and nobody even talked about it. And that's kind of what the book's about, is that like he admitted to himself that he was like, I am a participant in this crime because I too said nothing
Mm-hmm.
as it went on. Super
The
powerful,
fact that got
super
me
powerful book.
recently was that I learned that I guess it's during Stalin's time they had the secret police, and then they had the other secret police that spied on the secret police. So they
Yeah,
literally had like this crazy system, right, where even as a member of the state, you are not just like property of the state and property that's treated badly, but like you are kind of isolated, even as an operator, right? You're isolated and living in fear, living in fear, even when you're on top, right? And that's part of what's so bizarre and so horrible, right, about Soviet Russia. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe one of my themes
hmm
that I haven't quite figured out how to work into my public facing content, um,
yeah.
whether in the form of I write a little bit about it, right? But one of my themes is I think people can come to have a felt understanding of their historical context. And
You mean
people,
empathizing?
I mean that what it's like to be you can
Mhm.
include like where we are in history in a robust way. I can give an example. So
Sure.
I stole this example from princevogel Fry. Who
Free.
knows? Free. Who knows? I don't know. Do you know?
I asked him before I interviewed him,
What do you
and
say?
yeah,
Is it?
vocal free.
But he's not. Well, I have objections to how he
He could be
pronounces
wrong.
things.
It's his name, bro.
It's his
Mario
name.
Mario.
Yeah,
It depends on the person.
Mario. Jesus Christ.
I came
The
from New York, so
right, right,
we said Mario.
right.
What are you gonna do?
What do you, I mean, I can't stop you. Um, I stole this from him, which is he noted that it's like a thought experiment. So imagine that you were holding or you found in your room when you came home the Constitution of the United States of America.
Baller.
How do you feel about it? What do you do?
I'd be shocked and doubtful. I would doubt that it was real.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's
I
say it
I
was
would
verifiable. You know, you came to believe it was real.
well well truly I would start creating a narrative because you're trying to find an explanation. So I'm I would immediately be like, why is this here? How is it here? I would probably leave it alone
Right.
and be like, well, this somebody else brought it here, and I'm gonna let them finish whatever they were working on
Right.
as I go about my life. Because if it doesn't have that explanation, right, it's almost like irrelevant.
Right.
Now, I don't know it's real, and
L-
how could someone persuade me it was real? Like,
Okay, guys. Let me
I'm not an
tweak it.
expert.
So
Sure.
imagine, they brought it over to your house. Like they walked you into wherever they hold that thing. I guess in National Treasure, it's like where is it? Just
And
in DC? Is that
it's a
again?
crazy guy I know that's been
Right.
wild on the Constitution for the last 30 years.
Right. Um, let's say it's verified. Let me tell you how I'd feel about it. I feel like the object is like a holy object. It's basically how I feel. Like if I imagine it almost has an aura. If I imagine putting my hands close to it, my hands stop moving because I don't want to fuck it up, right? I
Sure.
just feel like it's like beaming with light, right? And it's not because I'm like, you know, the most gung ho and patriotic person in the universe. I like my country, but I'm kind of trying to speak as someone who I don't know where I am at the patriotic sense dial, but I think I'm
Sure.
maybe sort of normal about it. And nevertheless, to me, it feels like kind of important. And this is what I mean by a felt understanding, because when you get to these objects of essentially sacred value to a society or to a culture, even that makes it into your mind somehow, right? Even that makes it into your spiritual existence. So, again, credit to Vogelfrey for the particular example because it was clarifying for me. And so I guess for me, it's like, I think there are a million things like that. Like, we don't think about so many things. I mean, we don't think about every object. Every object in your room was made at a place, right, by people, right?
Yeah.
All that shit, all the scientific advances, like all the people who lived and died, all the stories, all of that stuff. That's our context, and
Sure.
it may be impossible to grasp all of it, but I think there's like a mountain worth trying to climb, however far you get, in terms of really getting like what the hell we're doing here as a species.
Yeah. It's an interesting example because you're making me think about what would really drive emotion in me if I encountered it and believed it was real. And like if I met Paul McCartney, I would be like, I'd shake his hands and I'd be like, this is cool.
Yeah.
But if I met like Tom York, I'd be like,
Right.
like I wouldn't be able to emotionally handle it.
Yeah.
I like would not believe it almost. I would almost feel like I was dirtying him. And but that's just because of my musical taste.
Yeah.
So there's this there is this emotional concept, but of course living in America and saying the Pledge of Allegiance, like there's this deep American thing going on. But if
Right.
I try to extend it to something different, like the British crown, I'd be like, oh, it's the British crown.
Right.
If
Right.
I look and try and steal it, I'm just gonna get, I don't know what's gonna happen. It's not gonna be good.
Right.
But I wouldn't think like this British crown is holy and I can't touch it. I'd be like, well, I don't want to smudge it, but
Right.
it's not important to me because I'm an American.
But would you like throw it on your head and go like get a beer? Like, would you like go to McDonald's?
If I was allowed to, that'd be really.
If you're allowed to. So, but the thing is, I think some people might be like rightfully offended by that concept, right?
Sure.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. They're allowed to be. All 12 of you.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
This is a British people respecting YouTube channel. Go ahead.
But it's hard to think of like those items that would be truly sacred to me. And I think the Constitution is a good example for Americans. And like, if you could prove to me that like an object was an object of Jesus Christ,
right?
That he owned, or it was the veil that he wore, or something, then that would be true for me. Like, even if
Spear of Destiny,
even if you're not a Christian, like the fact that dude lived and did stuff is
right. And that's also a test as well, by the way, of there's something like intersectionality, right, is a like word that comes up, and a lot of people are not gung-ho about it because of the movement that it's associated with and things that it does. And nevertheless, and I'm not like the biggest proponent of like intersectional whatever in the universe, but I found when I try to figure out like what I am and who I am, there's a million fucking ways to do it. And I started doing this activity, tracing back where I'm from, Italy and the Eastern European side, and like, oh, am I really characteristically from this city? Am I like, is there something Chicagoan right about me? What is the fact that like, when my family came to the United States, all this stuff, and I was like, holy shit, I'm doing that activity, and that there are more and more layers, right, to identity. And this is something that I think that the left, parts of the left, have figured out in an interesting way, that it's like a much more normal and cool concept than most people think. It just has kind of, really intense branding, right? And
so what did you get from that? What did you get from that experience of exploring the intersectionality, as you call it?
Right. This intersectionality thing.
Supposedly called intersectionality.
I mean,
it sounds like provenance. Like you're looking at your provenance.
Yeah. Right. We've got a, got a bona fide Michael Kersey here. Let's like trace back where it's from and sort of what it's made of and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell
the pedigree of this guy.
Right, pedigree. I can say that one thing that it has made me confused about is religion, and so this is
why?
because I was raised Jewish, and because my mother's Jewish, right? And the rules say if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish, right? Those are what the rules are. And it's interesting too because in a lot of ways the different religions don't follow the same rules as each other, but sometimes they agree that they're going to set a boundary. So according to the Catholic Church, am I Jewish? It's a good question. I asked this on Twitter. I'm led to believe that it's like, yeah, that's like a respected thing, you know? Right. They're not going to stamp of approval all of the Jewish beliefs and all of the Jewish rules and stuff like that, but they'll say, sure, we're going to go with you on that one. That's my impression. And that's just interesting to me. Does that make it? Is it true? What would make it true? So I was bar mitzvahed. I went through confirmation by all the rituals. In accordance with the rituals, I was brought into the people of the book, and that's the thing. But there's personally, I'm also American, right? And one thing Americans like to do is say, "Fuck tradition, fuck the rules. I can do whatever I want," right? And so I ask, do I respect those rituals? Should I respect those rituals? What would it mean to? Do I have to So according to me, not that I'm any fucking resource that anyone should care about what I think, but I do have an opinion, so I do think a thing.
Well, it sounds like you're essentially struggling with whether renouncing this would be real, or whether one must renounce it. Or what is?
Yeah, let me clarify that I don't want to convey that I'm on the teetering edge of renouncing my Judaism. That's not what it is. I'm just very curious about what this shit all means, and I'm trying to figure out also my religious identity. Also, even whether I should have one, because I think atheism is let me say at least a very respectable. There are very respectable forms of atheism. Intellectually respectable, meaning there are a built-up set of arguments that are interesting, and some of the arguments are right.
I would say if you're gonna be an atheist, being Jewish is a good way to go about
it. yeah. No. I know.
It's a respected way of being an atheist. It's way more respected than being an actual atheist.
Right.
I think.
Right. Just a non-believing Jew.
I heard.
Yes.
Never mind. I'm not gonna say. A friend told me a joke once. I don't know if I should.
Yeah, I could. I could cut it.
Let's do it. So
I can cut your Holocaust joke if you want.
It's not a Holocaust.
All right.
But my friend told me, he was like, "Yeah, see, it's really great. The Christians celebrate Christmas, and they're talking about the birth of their Savior, and we celebrate Hanukkah when we save some money on oil."
Uh-huh.
I always thought that was a really interesting distinction there.
Right. Well, different stories, different mythology. I can say one more little story about this if you're curious about my struggles with religious identity. I don't know.
Sure. That's where I was going.
If you want to hear, I have been moved by the story of Jesus Christ. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've read it, I've heard about it, and I was like, "Holy shit, this is a big deal. This is crazy." Okay. Yeah. I've asked what parts of this thing are historically true. Where does it and does it not matter? Whether it's historically true. When is the metaphor's power? Let's say we're just talking about fiction or a metaphor. When is that sufficient for me to accept the mind blowing effect it's having? Right. And I also tweeted that in some ways the story is more moving to me if Jesus was only, historically speaking, a mortal man, not also the Son of God.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Well, and I go back and forth on what I think about different sorts of religious things, but it was interesting because when this happened to me, when I was read the story of Jesus Christ, and I am happy to say that it did change me to have read it because I contemplated it, and there's something powerful there.
Did you read the whole New Testament, or was it the Book of Mark?
Parts of it, yeah. I read I read John, I read Luke, I read Matthew, and
you skip Mark.
Oh. Yeah. There's a lot of Bible I have yet to get to, but I asked myself, I was like, "Holy shit, am I Christian now or something?" I had that kind of effect.
Florida.
And Well, I thought it through really hard. I thought it through really hard, and I reserve the right to change my mind on this, but I thought it through really hard, and the thing I came to was, at the end of the day, I don't think that this human being was also a deity. Like, at the end of the day. And I thought that I thought that. I thought that he might be. But when I really got down to it, it turned out that what I thought is probably not. And so this is just I'm starting to try to get answers on.
Here's my question though,
Yes.
is are you a Christian as a philosopher? Like, I think this is a really important question for people,
Sure.
especially in America,
Right.
because I think that a lot of people reject Christianity so much that they also reject the philosophy, and that's a mistake. Because if you're a Nietzschean, like, you don't have to think Nietzsche was the son of God. If you're a Freudian, you don't have to think Freud was the son of God. You can just follow what they thought.
Right.
And you can do that for Christ. So you can be a Christian. And this is actually, like, if you go in the dictionary and look
Right.
up Christian, this is a lexical definition of Christian, is that somebody that follows the teaching of Christ.
Right.
So I agree with you. Like, I don't think Jesus,
On that,
I hope no Georgians are listening to this, but
Yes.
I don't believe Jesus was God. But I do think he was, like, way more interesting when you think, like, whoa, he was super crazy, I apologize, but he was a mystic that just had this incredible connection with
Right.
humanity and humankind, and he had this incredible capacity for love and
Right.
truth that is, like, unbeatable in all canon, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think here is that many of us, according to that definition of Christianity, are Christians whether or not we're Christian, right? Just because, not only in terms of personally following the thing, but if you want to talk about cultural influence, we very much live in a pretty Christian society, even if it's a sort of becoming a secular Christian society,
Right.
not as Christian as maybe it was.
You're not going to be able to escape it.
It's deep. I mean, it's deep in our bones, basically, and
Right.
and it's deep in our bones, I believe, in the way that, at least for me, the Constitution thing is.
Yeah.
Where for me, the Constitution has this vibe of, like, this crazy energy.
It's like
Right.
being an anarchist in America or being a communist in America. Like, you could be a communist in America, but you're going to work and pay for things. So good luck.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, 99.9% of them anyway. But you kind of see what I mean. It's the same thing with Christianity, because the concepts that are in Christianity and the stories that are in Christianity are so interwoven with the living society. It's, you know, I mean, that stuff is in everywhere. It's in India, it's in China.
I think our concepts. Part of my experience of reading the New Testament, as someone who didn't grow up with it, is learning how many phrases I was using in my life were from there. I didn't know that the Good Samaritan was a Bible thing. I just Good Samaritan. I don't know what's a Samaritan. It's a person from Samaria. Like, I just didn't know that, right?
Right. Yeah. No, it's true.
You know, we're just breaking bread. You know, like, there's just like a million things like that.
Yeah.
So basically, there's a way in which I don't super duper take people seriously when they state their ideologies for exactly the reason you said. And people don't always like this, but, you know, one thing I believe is, like, you know, a true atheist is very hard to find. A true individualist is very hard to find.
Many would say that they don't exist. It depends on how you define worship, really. It's like, I mean, David Foster Wallace talks a little bit about this, and This Is Water, and many others have talked about it, that we're all worshiping something. And I mean, if you try to imagine someone that's not, it's very difficult to even imagine in any way. Like, even if I imagine the Buddha or Jesus themselves, or somebody that's truly enlightened 100% of the time, like, they're still kind of worshiping aesthetics or beauty, the beauty of life itself, the oneness of everything. There's still something that they're participating that is greater than they are. And so it depends on what you call worship, because the things you worship are the things that you sacrifice for. And the truth is that we have this time. And because we have this time, and the substance of ourselves is inseparable from that time. You can always see what you worship by seeing how you spend your time.
That's interesting.
That, yeah, if you're spending your time, living a charitable, generous life, worshiping God, and um, being a participant in the church and studying Jesus, and trying to live like Jesus Christ, you're a Christian. If you're spending that time making money, and you're spending that time trying to feed your family, and you're spending that time being a participant in your community, then you might be an American or a capitalist American, something like that. But there are all these things where it's kind of why a lot of people that are religious kind of get like up in arms against people that like aren't religious enough,
Mm.
and it's because everybody worships. So the people that care more about their job than they care about church, or the people that aren't participating in the Word of God, and people that are doing all of that participation with Jesus Christ, for instance, since we're talking about it, they'll see that as worshiping something else. That if you're not
Right.
putting Jesus as the priority above everything, and not only Jesus, but the laws of God, and love. If you don't have love for the world and for God as number one, then there's something else you're worshiping, and that could be money, and that could be sex, and that could be your ego and your pride and your
Right.
prestige. But there's nobody around here that's walking around that's just like no man's an island, right? Like that's the way it is.
Yeah. The I guess one clarifying term that I might throw out, or sort of clarifying concept, is that people's endorsed views are important to them.
Right.
So a person who, on the belief level, on the felt emotional level, that such a person may believe in spirits, believe in ghosts. They may get creeped out when they go into like a haunted looking
Right.
building, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and at the same time, the endorsed, explicit, clear, verbal level, not believe in ghosts or spirits,
Huh.
or right.
That's interesting.
This is a big thing that I think about. So I don't exactly
I
think it
never thought about
makes.
that.
Yeah, I well, I feel like you were just kind of talking about it in a way where there's something like how the person lives versus what they say, right?
Right.
The,
But you're
the,
talking about a specific experience. Like when I watch a movie and there's
yeah,
like some demonic stuff going on in a horror movie,
right,
that freaks me out.
right,
Like,
right,
like I will literally have nightmares for 2 weeks if I
right.
watch that stuff.
And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean that you believe in demons or ghosts. It it would be interesting to figure out what it meant, and to really figure out what it meant, we'd have to
Yeah.
dive in and see exactly what it meant in your case. But sometimes
Let me
people
call. Let me
having
call Freud real quick.
yeah, hey
What was
Freud,
that? I love my mother. Well, I do. Thank you very much.
wholesome Freud. You love your mother, but just in a cool normal way. um, the That's a tweet. Um, Two people having freaking out about a horror movie can be freaking out very different ways for very different reasons, even if they look exactly the same. And one of them is shitting themselves because they are worried about the ghosts that they believe in, that they have always believed in since they were a kid.
Uh-huh.
Right? Like some people are really do be I see dead peopling, okay, and other people will be freaking out because it's not really about the ghost. It's that they're worried about things happening by accident that are really bad. Whatever it is. That's a pretty mundane concept that a human being of any belief system can have. Religious or not. It's just like we all are in some ways worried about accidental bad events or the unknown or whatever. And so, in a sense, I think there's a lot of work. Not in a sense. Full stop. I think there's a lot of work to do in understanding ourselves. Right? Know thyself is fucking inscribed on the temple of the Oracle of Delphi, and not only that, it's in the movie The Matrix when Neo walks in to talk to the Oracle. It says, I'm going to mispronounce this, it's Temet Noske in kind of, what do you call it? Like medieval looking letters above the door, know thyself, right? And I think there's a lot of work to do there. And we don't believe the things we think we believe is sort of one of my conclusions.
The way I'm interpreting this is that we fear snakes. And that fact is kind of strange when you think about it. Like, our DNA is putting like some kind of flags on our brain to like squiggly thing of a certain size that you notice. And when those 2 points are like plugged in at the same time, fear. That's a weird like the fact that behavior can be programmed by our DNA to me is strange, but it's obviously true. And when we are looking at like my natural response to, say, horror movies, and saying that I fear snakes and how that connects to a belief is strange. Like I'm trying to think of like Spinozan versus Descartesian. Descartes.
Cartesian.
Like,
Cartesian.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Why don't they say Descartesian?
I don't, because the day probably is an actual, like, it's probably two different words. That's my guess. But yes, Spinozan versus Cartesian.
It's like Bin Laden.
Forms of belief.
Sorry.
No, but
yeah.
Yes.
Spinozan Cartesian.
Descartes and Bin Laden. Yeah. So Spinozan versus Cartesian belief that like Descartes believed that we have a belief or we comprehend an idea and then we either believe or don't believe. And Spinoza was like, no, that's wrong. You believe first, and then you need to do a further step where you either certify or reject. But you can't help but believe. You believe every little thing you hear. And this is like really kind of weird to talk about, but I think it's evidently true if you really actually dive into it. But the thing about the Spinozan concept is that, like, if you think like my shirt is not red, your mind will actually for a moment like imagine my shirt being red and then say that's not true. So it's like you have to believe it in order to comprehend.
Speaking of dinner, I think I told someone's making food. Shall we wrap this in a suitable manner for two gents such as ourselves who each run talk show or podcast related? How do we end this?
As hosts?
As hosts.
This has been a becoming creature.
Wait, has this been a becoming creature? I assumed I was going to put this on my YouTube channel.
No, I just thought that was my sign off.
Yeah, okay.
That's my sign off.
Sounds good.
God damn.